Hi everyone, and this is Poisoned by a Book's review of The Picture of Dorian Gray. This is my first book review, so bear with me. I'm still kind of getting settled into the whole vlogging video thing, and I'll probably be super awkward about it because that's how I work. The Picture of Dorian Gray was published in 1890 by the wonderful and most talented best writer in the world, Oscar Wilde. The basic plot of Dorian Gray, and I do mean basic plot, is at the beginning of the book you have a man named Dorian Gray. He is the pillar of purity, if you will. Beautiful, innocent, everything, the modern dandy wants to be. Or at that time modern, in 1890, whatever. And then he has a picture painted of him, which is a perfect representation of who he is. His soul, the light in his eyes, all this nonsense. And then basically you have Lord Henry, who comes in and he tells Dorian Gray that this picture is going to be always and forever more beautiful than he will be because Dorian will keep on aging and this picture will stand as a testament to his beauty that once was rather than, the ugliness that will be. Dorian, being a young but rather naive gentleman, throws himself onto a couch and declares that he wishes the portrait could get older while he stayed the same. Well, spoiler alert, his wish comes true and he spends the whole rest of the book corrupting his soul, which is transferred onto the painting while he stays beautiful. As for this book, character-wise, I pretty much like everyone. Basil Howard, he's alright. I just feel like he's, is in love with Dorian, and it's 1890, so they can't be in love. Dorian is kind of, I don't know, people really love Dorian on Tumblr, and they really love, this idea that he's, this beautiful man, and he's, this pretty boy, and he's kind of bad and dark and dangerous, but I don't really find Dorian to be that interesting of a character. He's this, he goes through this huge transformation, both physically on his painting and then, emotionally as the man that he is. But I find Lord Henry's character to be, infinitely more interesting. I think he's hilarious. He's got some really ace turn-of-the-century sexism that you just can't find anymore. And he is essentially, I think, the puppet master of Dorian, which is why I find his character to be bit more interesting because Dorian, this whole thing starts because Lord Henry elicits it, and I think then Lord Henry's character is, he's an interesting mix. He's in his face than what he believes, and he's in your face about, what he thinks society is and how society works and how he's pessimistic and a realist and all of these things. But at the same time, Lord Henry doesn't commit the sins and commit the atrocities that Dorian does. Lord Henry, kind of admires them and thinks they're fun and interesting and all these, murder. He's like, I would love to know a murder. All of these, ridiculous things, but he just says them to be ridiculous half the time. Yeah, he convinces people that that's what he believes. But when you see Lord Henry, who is still a gentleman and still reserved, and then you have Dorian, who is the personification of it, it's like Lord Henry is the Dorian and Dorian is the portrait, if that makes sense. Dorian is the personification of Henry's sins, of the life Henry wants to lead. And Dorian kind of is this, this kind of man who just lets things run wild and kind of takes everything Lord Henry says to heart, opposed to it with a grain of salt. That's why I find their relationship super interesting. The last thing I wanted to cover was quotes, and if you follow me on Tumblr, which is poisonedbyabook.tumblr.com, you'll know that I posted literally every single quote that I highlighted in the book. I have tons and tons of quotes, little hundreds, that's not what I have. But here I only want to talk about 10 of the most, I'd say, important quotes, or quotes that I find most intriguing and most enlightening. And what I briefly want to preface this is by saying is that Oscar Wilde to me is the end-all be-all of the English language contemporary. Obviously there's Shakespeare and there's Chaucer and there's, whatever. But for contemporary, modern English, I am in love with Oscar Wilde. What he does with language is astonishing and disheartening to an effect because I will never have that command over the English language. But overall, Oscar Wilde has this astuteness when he's writing, if you could call it that. Before I continue on this fangirling of Oscar Wilde, I'm just gonna say the 10 quotes or else we'll be here all day. 10. Your cynicism is simply a pose. For me, this quote really strikes a pose because I think in today's society, being apathetic or being cynical is completely not only condoned, but completely, expected and sought after almost. I would say that it's, cool to be unexcitable. It's interesting and more like it's uncouth to have enthusiasm towards things. 9. I'd come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating. If I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. It is, yeah, no, this is just me. I don't like things like a normal person. I go from not knowing it exists to completely and utterly consumed by it. 8. I suppose it comes from the fact that none of us can stand other people having the same faults as ourselves. We always have that thing where you don't like someone because they're a bit too like you. And, you find them crass and loud and bitchy and arrogant and all of these things, when in reality, it's basically just holding a mirror up to yourself, and it's uncomfortable to look at. 7. Wonder who it was that defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Preach. 6. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Preach. 5. I should fancy the real tragedy of the poor is that they can afford nothing but self-denial. 4. I represent to you all the sins you've never had the courage to commit. I feel like this is definitely especially true in the relationship of Henry and Dorian. And they have this relationship in the beginning where Dorian kind of looks up to Henry and is always kind of pushing his own boundaries and pushing himself past his norms and his like safety nets of social interactions, because Lord Henry might impress Lord Henry and it might do this for Lord Henry, and it's a weird relationship they have. It's like Dorian has a crush on Henry and Henry eggs it on, knows it's destructive, but that's what he kind of feeds on. Dorian doesn't quite get it. He's still at some base level too innocent to completely understand the corruption that's going on. It's not just corruption of him and his physical self, but there's a corruption that he doesn't quite get. It's a corruption, it's like a third person corruption, and Lord Henry understands it, which is what makes Lord Henry's character brilliant, is that he's this dubious and evil kind of guy, and no one really notices. They all kind of accept it. They really like him. They think he's funny, and he says these really awful things to people, but they just let it slide by. 3. There is a luxury in self-reproach. When we blame ourselves, we feel no one else has the right to blame us. 2. Her death had all the pathetic uselessness of martyrdom. This quote is just one of the reasons I love Oscar Wilde. It's just brilliant insofar as it's balanced, and it rolls off the tongue, and it's just clever and witty. For him, it's just one of all of these off-the-cuff remarks that Lord Henry makes that is truly hilarious and a little bit heinous, but you kind of like it. You're drawn in by his like clever cuteness, his coy command of the English language. And finally, number 1, the books that the world call immoral are the books that show the world its own shame. I think that's all for me. Thanks for bearing with me, and hopefully these will get a little less awkward as time goes by. I'll get better at editing, I'll get better at, reviewing things more fully, and trust me, I have a lot of books coming up. I have several comic books and graphic novels to review, The Handmaid's Tale, I'm about to finish, Divergent, tons and tons of books, so hopefully this will become like a weekly, maybe bi-weekly thing. It depends on how much I can read and how much I get done in university so I can read, if that makes sense. And so, thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Do not, under any circumstances, watch the awful movie